Hey everyone, this is Melina. Welcome back. Today I'm going to be talking a little bit about some of the books that I read in February. I will admit that some of the books I thought I would finish, I didn't. I ended up taking like a last minute trip to Universal with my sister. So if you're ever in need of, a break and you're looking for a reason to take one, definitely would recommend a spontaneous trip with your little sister. But anyway, I have a lot of really good ones to talk about today, mostly because they were written by people that I personally know. So I'm going to start with a poetry book written by someone that I actually met in Florida. It's called A Decade of Desire by Melanie Malcolm. It's a little poetry book. I'm going to read you what's written on the back. So it says, a poet and avid journaler, Melanie writes from her tiny home in Jupiter, Florida, where she lives a minimalist lifestyle with her husband, Jacob, and two dogs, Mac and Scampy. Utilizing her degree in biology, she unapologetically advocates for the environment in all aspects of environmental consciousness, sustainability, and living ethically for the soul and the planet. Additionally, she holds a passion for the continual discovery and deepening of emotional intelligence, mental health, and the best of moody Spotify playlists. Connect with her on Instagram at Melanie Russo Malk. So I want to preface this by saying that I felt as like a self-published author and as someone trying to, gain a following with my own books, I felt like God was saying to me, if I want to be supported by people around me, I had to support people around me. So, and then soon after that, it was like everyone around me started publishing books. So I buy pretty much all of them. If you're a person around me and you've written a book, I'm probably going to buy it unless I am like broke in the moment. Um, so it's really, really cool to be able to like read and support other people on their journey. So I'm going to start by saying that. And then this book, aside from the fact that it's like really, really pretty, like let me show you some of the artwork. It's based on seasons. It's like there are four seasons, obviously. And each season has its own like little drawing. It's beautiful. And I really loved this poetry book because it really like despite the fact that the author is a Christian, it gave, well, actually, okay, how do I say this? I think it gave like a degree of realism to the Christian walk and like the walk with God. And I really like books like this too because they really allow for the person to share what they've gone through, what they've experienced without feeling that judgment. Because the truth is that despite the fact that you may be a Christian, that doesn't mean that you're perfect, despite the fact that you know like what kind of the morally right decision would be based on your faith doesn't mean that you always make it. And I feel like a lot of this was very relatable to me. And it's interesting too because she really captures, I want to say it's maybe like three or four relationships, it seemed like romantic relationships leading up to the one that she's currently in. And even that, she showed some of like the depth of that. Like it's not all perfect. Just because I found this person doesn't mean it's always perfect between us. And I think one of the most beautiful things captured by this book, one of the most painful things I would think to experience probably, and then to write about, is this idea that like the person that you most want is not always the right person for you. And there is this like dichotomy sometimes of, I know, I know that this person is bringing like I'm like attracting bad things into my life by having this person. We're either in a very unhealthy relationship or we just have different beliefs or different values. But then I also like really love this person, and that's really confusing. So there can be like a dual almost grief about what could have been and grief about what is, even if the relationship itself is, like I said, unhealthy. And I think it's so easy to look at our friends, not just women, I think men as well, and to say, this relationship is clearly so unhealthy. Like, why are you still in it? But I think that's an oversimplified way of viewing things. Like clearly that relationship is serving something, clearly there was something missing in that person's life that they feel this relationship is adding to, no matter how unhealthy or unstable that relationship might be. So for those reasons, I really, really enjoyed this poetry book. I thought some of the poems in it were just so like beautiful and poignant, and they're all ordered like one through, I don't remember what the last number is. So one of the poems I really liked is poem 17. and I squared this part. And the saddest part is that I'm not sure which of the two is more depressing, losing me or you. And that really spoke to me. I think also because for me, like I've definitely been in a place where it kind of felt like what's like the bigger priority for me right now, like who I authentically am or this relationship. And that can be a really hard decision to make when you are like insecure and when you just really want to be loved. And so I would definitely give this book 5 stars. And if you are looking for someone to relate to on um, struggling through a breakup, even if you know that it's the best decision for you, even if it was like a long time ago, I think that sometimes you can get over somebody, but you don't immediately get over like the harm that that situation might have done to you. And if you are in a position where you're like, why am I not over this person? I should be over this person, like, that's okay. Um, Feelings are not logical. If they were, then they would be thoughts, and they're not. So, once again, 5 stars to this book. Another book written by somebody that I know and love is called Color the World with You by Natasha Goss. I honestly do not know where I put it. I probably gave it to somebody to read. So, I'm just going to read the description to you. All right. Color the World with You is a compilation of free thought prose and poetry. Written with character, sass, and slight humor, this little book covers topics relevant to the human spirit, including love, heartbreak, and faith. Its words are purposefully crafted to speak to people in whatever season they may be in life, and however far along they may be on their Christian journey. Weirdly, I feel like this book like ties into the other book. I think in the Christian community, I think it's always good to have that honesty about, like these are the things that I've gone through and they've led me to where I'm at now. Because when we pretend to be perfect, it's actually really damaging in the long run because then people around us think I have to be perfect. And if I'm not perfect, then I can't earn God's love. And the reality of it is like I've messed up just like the next person has messed up, just like the next person has messed up. And none of us are perfect. So it's really important for us to share not only our successes, because they can be encouraging, but also like the ways in which we've fallen short and God has like picked us up. And I thought her way of like capturing life was really beautiful. Like we are from different generations, but reading some of the stuff, especially the stuff that she wrote about childhood, like weirdly really resonated with me, even though some of the experiences like weren't some of the foods she talked about eating like as a Brazilian weren't necessarily things that I grew up eating. Or just different like music she might have been listening to wasn't exactly the music I was listening to, but the way that she was able to describe the different situations in her life was so beautiful, was so eloquent. And um, for those of you who know Natasha too, you know her to be like a poet and someone who does like spoken word events. Like I have in the past, when I was like a teenager, performed one of her spoken word pieces and it was really cool. Um, so I would definitely recommend that. It's a really beautiful story about just like a journey toward finding yourself, which is really what we're all trying to do, like find ourselves. And for those of us who believe that God is a big part of that, like learning where those things intersect. So definitely 5 out of 5 to that one as well. Okay, another book written by somebody that I know, which I've also seemed to misplace and probably gave to someone to read because I like to recommend good books to others, is called 26 Voices of Silence by Jennifer Joseph. The description of that is the nuanced difference between complete personal liberation freedom and living a life you love and the paralyzing despair of disempowerment is one thing: your voice. Your ability to use your voice and communicate your truth could ultimately mean life or death. So, what do you do when you open your mouth to speak, but it only yields silence? Imagine feeling like you were trapped and voiceless for 26 years. This is a vicious cycle that Jennifer Joseph knows all too well. From a young age, Jennifer grappled with finding and using her voice. Journaling became her only release to express the thoughts and emotions that she was experiencing but was unable to communicate. In her memoir, Jennifer tells her story of turning tragedy into triumph. Journey with us as we listen to the 26 voices of silence. Um, So this book, it's weird because I almost feel like all three of these kind of first books go together because even though they're kind of honest in different ways, there is so much heaviness in this book. So definitely like trigger warning if you're reading it. And I think there are some really good resources in the beginning of it as well. But the author of this book was really able to like journal through some excruciating things that have happened to her in the past and that should never have happened, how that impacted her self-esteem, and how she learned to survive. Because I think once again, it's really easy to look at someone from the outside and say, well, why are they doing that? Why are they with that person? Why are they using those substances? Why are they blah, blah, blah? But we don't realize like there's like a pain underneath that's being like pushed down by these unhealthy behaviors. And despite the fact that this book isn't very long, I think that the author really communicates all of that in a very eloquent and beautiful way. And I think it's really interesting too because the way that the book ends is actually like the first interaction I ever had with the author. So it's interesting to see like the backstory leading all the way up to that, and also how much she was able to like put herself, her own desires, or even like lack of love for herself aside so that she could be a better person for her kids. And currently, my church is in the year of legacy. So I think that's so beautiful to see. Like, maybe I don't have it in me for you, but I have it in me for the next generation. And although my story may be completely different than this author's, I've definitely been there where I've made decisions that I'm like, this is a very painful decision for me in the moment. But because I'm actually thinking about how would this impact my kids down the line, because I'm thinking like down the line, even though I might not have been anywhere near having kids, like how is this action going to impact them? And I don't want to bring them up in dysfunction or make life more complicated for them than it needs to be. So I thought this book, I definitely would also give it a 5 out of 5, because I just really, really was moved by. I think I read it all in like maybe 2 days, a day and a half, because I was really moved by the author's ability to just really name some of the things that had happened to her in her life, in her relationships, even in her school, um, that really shaped her into who she is now. And I think seeing the struggle makes the kind of victory of learning to love yourself and to accept the love that God has for you even more rewarding. Okay, so to move on to a different book that I own, not written by somebody that I know, is this book, A Spring Harvest by Joffrey Bake Smith. I honestly don't know how to pronounce that, but anyway. Um, so backstory on this book, I was watching the movie Tolkien about J.R.R. Tolkien, who wrote Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit and a couple of other things, for those of you who don't know, because I am a big fan of his and C.S. Lewis, and that is a great movie. Sidebar, that's a great movie. Um, on just like the importance of art, even in times of war and even in times of difficulty. And I think we can apply a lot of that right now. As I mean, there's like literally war going on around us, and then COVID and all this stuff. Like, there's all this tragedy happening around us, but our art is still very important. Um, it's still important for us to be able to express ourselves, and for other people reading it to feel like, wow, I feel that that resonates with me. Because weirdly enough, this was, I believe, before World War I, I want to say. Yeah, going into World War I, which was like over 100 years ago. But a lot of it honestly felt really relevant to like some of the experiences that we have today. So the back of this is actually written by J.R.R. Tolkien because the author of this book was killed in the war. And then Tolkien compiled all of his poems and published it because he felt that the world needed to hear it. So the back of it says the poems of this book were written at very various times. One, Wind Over the Sea, I believe even as early as 1910. But the order in which they are here given is not chronological beyond the fact that the third part contains only poems written after the outbreak of the war. Of these, some were written in England, at Oxford in particular, some in Wales, and very many during a year in France from November 1915 to December 1916, which was broken by one leave in the middle of May. The Burial of Sophocles, which is here placed at the end, was begun before the war and continued at odd times and in various circumstances afterwards. The final version was sent me from the trenches. Beyond these few facts, no prelude and no envoy is needed, other than those here printed as their author left them. JRRT. And just a sidebar too, I one of the reasons I love like the relationship between J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis is that they really believed in each other's work, albeit sometimes in like very petty and like kind of amusing ways. So it's really important to have friends that like care about your work. Like this did not have to come about at all after his death. Like he was gone. There was no way he was even going to know. but Tolkien really saw the importance in his work and knew that somebody needed to read it one day. So I love that vision and that foresight. So one of the poems that I really enjoyed in this book, it's under the title The Last Verses. I don't have a page number. There are no page numbers on this, but it's toward the end, like very close to the end. I'm just going to read it. O ageless non-peril of stars that shinest through a mist of cloud, O light beyond the prison bars, remote, unwavering, and proud. Fortunate star and happy light, ye benison the gloom of night. All hail, unfailing eye in hand. All hail, unsilenced voice, that makest dead men understand. The very dead in graves rejoice, whose utterance writ in ancient books shall always live for him that looks. Many as leaves from autumn trees, the year shall flutter from on high, and with their multiple decease the souls of men shall fall and die. Yet, while the empires turn to dust, you shall live on, because you must. Oh, seven times happy he that dies, after the splendid harvest tide. When strong barns shield from winter skies the grain that's rightly stored inside, there death shall scatter no more tears than o'er the falling of the years. Aye, happy seven times is he who enters not the silent doors before his time, but tenderly. Death beckons unto him, because there's rest within for weary feet. Now all the journey is complete. And I thought that was so beautiful because I mean, I just think it echoes something that a lot of us feel, which is that we want to reach the end of our lives feeling like I'm good. Like I know where I'm going. I've had a great life. I've had a fulfilled life. I've loved a lot of people. A lot of people have loved me. I've had difficulties, but on the whole of it, things have been more positive. And it's ironic because he died, I want to say maybe in his 20s, like he was in the war. His life probably was taken in a very violent way. And he wasn't able to have that end, but that doesn't mean that he can't still have those hopes. And so I can imagine that maybe that was written, like maybe that was one of the poems written from the trenches, like Tolkien had said. And just this idea of like, it's okay to want to read to like there's that expression like to greet death as an old friend or something like that. I don't know where that's from. That just came into my head. But to really reach the end of your life and think like, yes, this was worth all of it. And I mean, personally, I believe in heaven and I believe that heaven will just erase everything else and make it all worth it. But still, like there is that desire because we're so limited in our knowledge of like what comes after that this right now that we're living in matters the most to us. And I do like I want to live to be like really old and have like all these grandkids and all these great stories and all these like things hanging around my house that remind me of the cool things that I did and the fulfillment that I had in my life by like really listening to God. But not all of us get that. But that doesn't mean that we can't strive for a life that would make us feel that way in the end. So I would give a 5 as well, to be honest, to that book, just because I feel like it's hard for me to give like low scores to poetry because it's something so personal. And I don't feel like it's right to tell someone else like this way that you made sense of the world I don't like it. But you definitely can feel like when you're reading it, the turn of the things that he was worrying about, and then the war, and then just feeling like really, really despondent, discouraged. Like, what comes after this? Like, if anything comes after this, and for him, nothing. Like nothing came after it. But his work continues to live on, and it reminds me of the Harry Potter reunion that came out at the beginning of this year and the actor who plays Hagrid, I don't remember his name, but he said something along the lines of like, in 50 years, I'm no longer going to be here, but Hagrid will. And I remember that making me really emotional. But it's true. Like, there is something about writing down words and knowing that they'll outlive you. Who knows? Maybe like nobody, I mean, God forbid, nobody will read my books again for as long as I live. But then, like 100 years after my death, someone stumbles upon them and is like, this has so much meaning to me. That's legacy too. Legacy isn't just what we see when we're alive. So there's a Bastille song that echoes something like that too. The chorus says, "I've written you down, now you will live forever, and all the world will read you, and you will live forever. In eyes not yet created, on tongues that are not born, I have written you down. Now you will live forever." I love that band, by the way, because they have some of the most poetic lyrics like ever. So, okay, because I was talking about Tolkien, I feel like it feels only right to talk about the C.S. Lewis book I read. It is my mission to read every C.S. Lewis book that has ever existed, just because love I love the way that he writes. So I read Out of the Silent Planet, which is the first of the space trilogy, and here's the description for that. In the first novel of C.S. Lewis's classic science fiction trilogy, Dr. Ransom, a Cambridge academic, is abducted and taken on a spaceship to the red planet of Malacandra, which he knows as Mars. His captors are plotting to plunder the planet's treasures and plan to offer Ransom as a sacrifice to the creatures who live there. Ransom discovers he has come from the silent planet, Earth, whose tragic story is known throughout the universe. So weirdly enough, I feel like if I had read it like with my own eyes, I would have given it a 4, but because I was listening to it, I'm going to give it a 5. I don't really know exactly how that makes sense to me, but I feel like because it's like older English by someone who is English as well, um sometimes there were parts where I'd have to like rewind a little bit, and C.S. Lewis is such like a world builder, so he'd be like, here's like the words that these alien species would use to mean this, and like tell you about like really like specific grammatical um things that affected like the way that they spoke. It's just the way that his mind worked is he was just such a genius. But I can't wait to read 2 and 3 of this book. I'm on like I have to finish the books that I'm like currently in the middle of. I'm in the middle of like 8. It's ridiculous. But I think that the way that he sees Earth through the eyes of a different society that hasn't experienced the same things as us is really, really beautiful. And even just the way of him, like, I think it's interesting because I think that there's something really powerful, something that our brains understand really well when a hypothetical or a concept is presented to us via a question. Like, okay, but why do you do that? Why did you do that instead of this? Like, why do you perceive things that way? And even like the way that one of the things that stood out to me was like the way that this alien species perceives time as not necessarily like um, a series of moments. I mean, they do see it as a series of moments, but it's like every moment is one that you live in, and that they were talking about how, like, in looking back at the past, you almost like sour the memory, like revisiting the memory. And it reminded me of this idea that when you revisit a memory, you change it little by little every time until it becomes unrecognizable, irrecognizable, question mark, from the original memory. And I thought that that was really, really interesting. Like that this alien species was really like, no, we live in the moment. We kind of do what we're told by the people above us, and we just believe, and like we cherish the little moments that we have without thinking like, how can I maximize this, which is kind of like a human like supersize everything mentality. And even this idea of like the kind of like angelic beings that appear, that that like the main character and other characters don't initially see them or hear them because they don't believe. um and that's just that was so interesting to me too, that it was like, okay, well, just because you don't see it or you don't believe it doesn't mean that it's not out there, it's not happening around you, and it's not greatly impacting you. And there's also a scene between Ransom, the main character, and this kind of like almost God figure where he was like, if you had come to me earlier, this would have been a better situation. Like these things might not necessarily have had to happen. This person that you were close to didn't have to die. And that to me was really like, it just like it did something for me. Like that really simple idea of your own lack of belief, your own lack of like bringing it to me and trusting that I'm going to handle it, I'm going to fix it. Like if you hadn't done that, then things might not necessarily have had to turn out this way. I'm still going to help you, but just know that in the future, when I tell you to come, come. Like don't waste time in disobedience and like thinking about like, okay, but if I do this or like this doesn't make sense, whatever. Like the will of God in our lives doesn't have to make sense to us. As long as it makes sense to him, that's the most important thing that matters. So and then aside from that, I really love space, and he references The Time Machine by H.G. Wells, which I read in college and also really liked. I don't know, there's just something about that, this idea of like extraterrestrial life forms. Like, do you guys believe in aliens? Because I definitely do. And I find it very annoying when Christians are like, well, aliens aren't in the Bible, so they don't have to be, that doesn't, so they're not real. They can't be real if they're not in the Bible. Like, I'm not in the Bible and I'm here, you know? And just because I feel like God doesn't have to tell us everything that he does. Like if the Bible doesn't say explicitly there are no aliens, then in my head I'm like, there are aliens. And it is kind of scary to think of the fact that like we would be alone in this whole universe. I don't know. What are you guys' thoughts? But I, like I said, would give that a 5 as well for just the ingenuity. I mean, it is a little harder to read if you're coming from like a middle grade like American book where it is a little more complex English, like the way of talking, the way of relating to others is a little bit different, but um, it's definitely a good one of his books. It's probably still not my favorite. I don't think it's above Screw Tape Letters or The Four Loves because those books are exceptional. The Screw Tape Letters are probably my favorite, but they're definitely up there. I've never read a C.S. Lewis book that I didn't like. So and finally, the last book that I read is called Clap When You Land by Elizabeth Acevedo. And the description is Camino Rios lives for the summers when her father visits her in the Dominican Republic, but this time on the day when his plane is supposed to land, Camino arrives at the airport to see crowds of crying people. In New York City, Yahaira Rios is called to the principal's office, where her mother is waiting to tell her that her father, her hero, has died in a plane crash. Separated by distance and puppy secrets, the two girls are forced to face a new reality in which their father is dead and their lives are forever altered. And then, when it seems like they've lost everything of their father, they learn of each other. So I thought this was like a really interesting concept to find out on both of their ends. Like, my father has a secret family. And the reason I'm finding this out is because my father is dead. So they don't even have that opportunity to be angry. They're like grieving him, but then they're also angry. And there's this idea of like, can you be angry at like a dead person? Is it respectful? I don't know. It's complicated and it's interesting to see how different their lives are. One growing up in, I want to say, New York, and the other in the Dominican Republic. And I really, really enjoyed reading both of their stories and the way that um, the author captured like the importance of the little things in each of their lives, like whether that be chess or dirt or whatever, like everything that she wrote had meaning. And I gave it a 4, and the only reason I gave it a 4 and out of 5 is that I wish we had more of the relationship between Camino and Yahaira because there was this kind of like long buildup and then they meet and it's like not I don't know, I felt like it was a little anticlimactic. Like things were resolved kind of quickly and I wish that they had maybe had some more conversations about like what does this mean? Like, do I have feelings of resentment toward you, even though it's not your fault? Because because he was kind of like Persephone, like he would go to New York for a couple of months and then he would go to the Dominican Republic for a couple of months and he would bounce back and forth. So I feel like I would have liked to see that dynamic a little bit more, but it was just this powerful story about like families are complicated and we can't expect our parents or anybody else in our lives to be perfect. Not saying that what he did was okay, obviously. I don't think it's right to have two families and them be hidden from each other, but like you can still love somebody and know that you don't agree with all of their decisions. And also, like on top of that point, this is I guess kind of a spoiler, but is one of the daughters, Yahira, gets into like an argument with him because she finds out about the other family and doesn't speak to him for like a year, and he dies without them ever having spoken to each other. And I feel like that really is powerful to me too. Ariel and I talked about this on our podcast once, where it's like you never know when someone's going to be gone, the things you might have wished that you said to them, the things you might have wished you asked them. And it's really not fair of us to expect perfection from other people. I'm not saying that we shouldn't set boundaries because I absolutely think that we should. Um, but it was, yeah, like I said, just a really beautiful story about like family complexity, and sometimes your hero ends up being this like imperfect person. There's the song by I think Sasha Sloan called Older, and the chorus says, the older I get, the more that I see my parents aren't heroes, they're just like me. And I think we all have that moment where we're like, I wanted you to do better, or I wanted you to have an answer for me in that moment and you didn't. And that doesn't mean that like our parents or our guardians or whoever around us doesn't love us. It just means that they're like people. And eventually we're going to be in that situation. Maybe if you want kids, for me, that's a situation that I would like to be in, and just recognizing like I'm not always going to have all the answers. I'm probably going to lack answers more than I have them. So I definitely would recommend it. It was another book I listened to, and it was like 6 hours, maybe 5 hours, 6 hours, and I listened to it on 1.25 speed. Um, so it went by really fast. If you have like a semi long drive, I would recommend it for that. But those are the books that I have read in the month of February. Like I said, I'm currently in the middle of like a million books for the month of March. So hopefully I finish them. One of them is literally like a 29-hour long audiobook that I've been listening to since like January. So we'll see if I finish that this month. But if not, I'll talk about some of the other things that I have read because that's the thing about me. I kind of bounce between books depending on my mood and what I want to read at the moment. But I do finish them for the most part. I do finish them, but I have a lot of them to finish. It's so bad. But yeah, let me know if there are any other books that you would want me to read, any thoughts that you had about any of my thoughts. And I will see you guys next week.